Today's video, we'll be discussing the medic role. We'll be going over where you should be at in the front lines, how to treat wounded soldiers, and how to get them out of the field. For the treatment section of this video, I'll be using the medic guide that I had posted in the Model Studios Discord in the community channel. Feel free to join the Model Studios Discord in our process to make the best World War II roleplay on Roblox. Let's start. Overview. The medic role is a job for those who enjoy getting their wounded comrades out of the line of fire and saved from death. Medics treat all sorts of wounds under all sorts of conditions, and they may not always work on just their allies. All medical personnel in the game are non-combatants and are not allowed to be targeted by the enemy. However, this does not make them immune to death, and they could still die to things like artillery, bombings, grenades, and things like indirect gunfire from a machine gun. Placement. Medics shouldn't stand in front of infantry whatsoever or advance ahead of infantry units. You cannot conduct recon adventures by yourself, so you'll need to stick with your allies at all times. Remember that you are still a character in the middle of a war. Therefore, you should be as scared of death as anyone else. Do not run out of cover in front of gunfire to get a wounded ally, because if you do, that MG has full permission to get you killed because of your dumb pathing. Moderators should and will enforce this soon, if not already. Stay behind your allies, and when you find a wounded ally, you need to make sure that you will be fine if you leave cover to grab them. Treatment. This will be the longest part of the video and possibly the most detailed. I will try to keep things short. If you have questions, you can ask them in the comments or through Discord. My disclaimer is that I am certainly not a doctor, and anything listed can be completely false. First of all, you need to inspect your patient to see if you absolutely have to move them. You should not move a patient unless you absolutely need to prevent them from bleeding out more and possibly dying or other complications. Medics in the Second World War were often told to ignore the wounded that had lost a limb, such as a leg, as they are no use to military forces anymore. Although many soldiers who lost limbs were recovered from the field and had lives after the war, not all of them did. Losing a limb usually involved a lot of heavy blood loss, and a medic would have to use a lot of resources to stabilize them. For this reason, I will not be covering the treatment of lost limbs, but it shouldn't be that difficult if you follow the rest of the guide. First of all, I will go over gunshots, then explosions like Sharpell. Keep in mind that the equipment I have in this section is United States related, but you should be able to use the same tools on every team. When treating a gunshot wound, first of all, you need to clear the wound of any obstructions. If there is clothing in the way, you can either roll the clothing up, or you can use your issued scissors and cut away the clothing. After exposing the wound, you should disinfect the wound so that way the soldier does not die later after they are patched up in a field hospital. Medics are issued packets of sulfa powder that are great for disinfecting wounds. Open up the packet and pour the powder over the wound and try to get it evenly throughout the wound. After disinfection, you should focus on stopping the bleeding. Medics are issued all kinds of bleed stop equipment, but the main one you should be using is the field dressing. Do not use your own equipment first. All soldiers are issued first aid equipment. Remove a field dressing from the wounded soldier's bag and treat them with their field dressing. Apply the dressing over the wound and hold pressure onto the wound. Talk with your patient and make sure that they stay awake and continue to apply pressure. After about 30 seconds, check to see if the bleeding had stopped or slowed. If it did stop, wrap the wound with a bandage and secure the bandage and prepare the patient for transport. If the bleeding did not stop, try and use a tourniquet on the limb affected and wrap the wound with a bandage and then prepare them for transport quickly. To use a tourniquet on the torso, put something heavy over the dressing and tie the tourniquet around the heavy object and the soldier. This will make the object basically try and keep the wound closed. Loosen the tourniquet every 3 minutes for about 20 or so seconds, then retighten. For Sharpell from explosives, do not remove the Sharpell. If you remove the Sharpell, the wound could bleed more. Instead, Remove a roll of gauze from there or your bag and apply it around the wound. If the bleeding stops, prepare them for transport. If not, go ahead and use a tourniquet. Well, what about morphine, I hear you say? Well, after you manage to stop or slow the bleeding of a wounded person, then you can move on to administering them the appropriate drug. If your patient is in pain, they may or may not need morphine. Soldiers, when initially hit by gunfire, will most likely not notice it immediately, despite movies portraying the idea that bullets send you straight to the ground. Most role players will probably act like people do in movies, so you'll just kind of have to go along with it. If your patient is clearly awake, you can administer them morphine. However, if a patient is going into shock or is clearly not very awake, do not administer them morphine, as this is sure to finish them off. Shock is when a patient is not pumping enough blood, and morphine will slow the heart down even more. Transport. After you have stabilized your patient and administer them the morphine or blood plasma they needed, you can move on to removing them from the field. The medic gamepad comes with a medic jeep that has a stretcher on the back. You can set the wounded soldier onto the stretcher and drive them back to the HQ and set them on a bed there, and then you can just leave them. If you do not have a medic jeep, you can always carry them back and walk all the way over there, or just find another method of transport. However, vehicles that are not identified with medical insignia can still be shot at. Therefore, you should always make it priority to use an identified vehicle if possible. Do not be afraid to hand wounded over to the enemy if it will save their life and get them out of the field. Coming up is a video of me finding, treating, and transporting a wounded soldier. You can use this little bit as a guide. That about wraps things up. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. I put tons of work into this. Thank you for watching. This about covers the entire how to roleplay a medic video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe for more of these how-to videos. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you on the front lines.